everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are continuing our wind down, and no wind down or discussion would be complete without a look at the Black nobility. Now, some individuals will try to assert that the Black nobility, that word Black, indicated something other than what it actually is, but we're going to look at who the Black nobility were out of Europe. We're going to also look at some myths that have been circulating related to American ancestry and some of these historical narratives. So we're going to look at some dynamics related to the phenotypes of individuals who were considered European versus those who are considered African or Indian. We're also going to look at some misdirection that is going around related to slavery and the slave trade. And in looking at the Black nobility of Europe, we're going to look at where the block is hot in terms of world distribution of some of those individuals. We're also going to address the issue of individuals coming out of Europe who were considered Negro, Black, colored, taking on the identity of American Indian. Some of this occurred, of course, due to intermarriage and those sorts of relationships. However, some of this dynamic took place in order to obscure the identity of individuals who were coming from Europe. And so you have some situations where individuals who were identified as Black Scots and Black Irish and Black Brit actually taking on the identity of Native American or Indian. And in some instances, again, you have the intermarriage, but you also have a dynamic whereby individuals took on those identities, or they belong to groups where they'll say the origins are obscured. And so we're going to look at some of that, and also some of this attack on individuals who are identifying as American descendants of slavery by individuals who probably very clearly have a lot of European roots, Black European roots, but do not want to talk about that, and instead they want to focus on, in many instances, fictive roots that they are claiming are American Indian or Aboriginal roots. But of course, in many instances, they have nothing to prove that this is the case. And so they have that European ancestry in terms of that name. They have a European ancestry narrative even, where they indicate they have no history of slavery in their background, that private ownership of land, and no history of any ancestors who could be identified as African. However, they cannot often provide information related to an actual traditional pre-colonial indigenous tribe or clan or family or nation to which they descended. And we're also going to look at some of the other roots going on with such individuals. Really, it is, again, of course, coming out of an arm of the conscious community. And so you have these individuals who are merging all of these identities together in an attempt to obscure identities. So they will claim to be Kemetic Indians. They will claim to be descendants of the Queen of Sheba. They will be those Indians. And so they have a number of these interesting narratives that also speak to the dynamic of ethnic cleansing that took place with the indigenous people when the Europeans came over. And we're not talking about the quote-unquote white Europeans necessarily. We're also talking about those quote-unquote Black Europeans that came over, or those quote-unquote African Black people that came over, or African white people that came over, and then did this merging and mixing and conflating of identities. Myths/lies that create and maintain chaos and confusion, and these myths and lies are circulating everywhere now. A few of the lies that you've possibly heard, and when you hear these things coming from an individual, it gives you an idea of the extent to which you should give any credence to other things that they say related to historical narratives. And so one myth/lie is that every brown person is an African in the Americas. The other one is every brown person is an Indian in the Americas. There's another one, every light person is an Indian in the Americas. Every brown person is a Moor in the Americas. Every light person is a European in the Americas. Every brown or light person is a grandchild of Jacob in the Americas. In other words, melanated people. So another one is every other person, that other, that is considered a foe is an Edomite or a Hamite. Another one is every brown person is a descendant of victims of slavery and Jim Crow. Another one is every brown person is a descendant of indentured servant American Indians. The big ones that are coming out now, really serious ones that relate to slavery denial, is that slavery never occurred, or slavery only occurred in the reverse from America to Africa. And this, of course, comes out of those groups who are identifying as Aborigine online, and they may not be Aborigine in real life. Another one coming out of that same group and some other individuals more recently is that slavery was actually paid labor. They were salaried. The fact is if they were salaried or paid, the word slavery would not be attached to it. Now we're going to look at the memoirs of John Mackey so that we can dispel a couple of myths in that list. And the myths revolve around the idea that every brown person in America is descended from someone who was enslaved from Africa. Or in the alternative, what is, emerging now is that every brown person is descended from someone identified as an American Indian or indigenous person. So we're going to look at is the fact that many, again, we've discussed this before, but many individuals who are brown are actually descended from people from Europe. And it's hard for some people to conceive of that because of the narratives that we have been given over time, but you are going to see that there is plenty of evidence to support the notion that individuals who were brown were in Europe, and as already indicated before, many of them were kicked out of Europe for a variety of reasons. In some instances, you had the dynamic of treason, high treason, related to the Jacobites, the Jacobi. And then in some instances, you had individuals who were kicked out because people were taking the lands of other individuals, and there was also this dynamic of kicking people out or deporting people based upon the Inquisition. So we're going to quickly look at some of the black nobility, black and brown nobility in Europe, in the UK area during the time of King William, Queen Anne, and King George I. And the first individual we're going to look at is an individual who was ambassador to the King of Portugal. He's indicated as bred as a common lawyer, and he was described as a man of intrigue, very muddy in his conceptions, not quickly understood in anything. However, in his complexion and manners, much of a Spaniard, a tall black man, 50 years old. You have another individual, Charles, Duke of Somerset, from the ancient family of Seymour. He is described as of middle stature, well-shaped, a very black complexion, and a lover of music and poetry, and of good judgment. Now let's look at that Seymour surname. As you can see, the Seymour surname has gone quite a ways there, and the block is hot in the United States. And also a small island, and we're going to look at the people in that small island, very high density for the number of people there. Again, the block is hot in the United States for the name Seymour, and yes, that name Seymour is related to Moore. And here we can see the highest incidence is in the United States for Seymour. You've got 33,000. This outnumbers the individuals in England with the name. And England comes in at 12,000, and then Australia at 5,000, Canada at 4,000, and then drops down for South Africa and the Bahamas and New Zealand. So clearly you can see that the individuals with this surname left out of Europe and traveled, migrated to the United States in large numbers. And here you can see spelling variations for Seymour. Again, still very high prevalence in the United States, and then you also see Jamaica over there. And here you can see individuals from the Nauru Island, and you can see that this is the place where they have that highest incidence in terms of that surname Seymour. Moving right along, we have John Lord Somers, and we can see here that he is of a grave deportment, and he is of a brown complexion, nearly 50 years old. You can also see off to the right, you have Lawrence, Earl of Rochester, is second son to Chancellor Hyde, and so you can see that name also. So you see a number of surnames that are, again, very common around the world, particularly in the West here in the United States. And here we have Scots nobility. We have the Earl of Errol, coming from the ancient and noble family of Hay, also Hayes. And also this individual is described as he is of a brown complexion, middle stature, towards 70 years old. Over to the right, you see nobility of Scotland again, the Earl of Perth, and is of middle stature and of a brown complexion. And here you have additional individuals. You have one individual described as he is a black man of middle stature. You have another individual who is a man of brown complexion, full of fire, with a stern, sour look. You have an individual identified as Lord Belhaven from the family of Hamilton, and so that is the surname Hamilton, very common American surname there. This individual is described as a person who is a rough, fat black man who also likes to make long speeches in Parliament and has the vanity to print them. And here you have again from the ancient and noble family of Hayes, and you also see described as a short brown man towards 60 years old. You have another individual who is described as a brown man. And we can see that the block is hot for the surname Hayes in the United States. And you can see the incidence in the United States is really high at 243,000, and a steep drop for England at 39,000. And then you have Australia at 22,000, Canada at 12,000, Ireland 12,000, and then another drop for South Africa. And off to the right, you can see an individual who used to carry that surname Hayes. And moving right along, we see in the court of Great Britain, Sir George Rooke. And yes, Rook is just as Rook, the chess piece. And you see this individual is described as of a gentleman's family in Canterbury. And a very lengthy discussion is provided related to this individual, and this individual is described as being of a brown complexion. And doing a little background and cross-referencing on this surname reveals that this surname actually means those individuals who have black hair or dark complexions. And you can see this Rooke family migrated to America very early, migrated into Virginia, also into Boston. So you see in the 1650s, 1652, 1654, a significant number of individuals were coming in very early in terms of colonizing. And when you see dynamics like this, you can see how it would be almost impossible for indigenous people in certain parts of the Americas not to have this integrated identity with Europeans, whether the Europeans were identified as quote unquote black or quote unquote white. And so you do see a lot of intermixing going on, and so you will have individuals who will have what you consider Indian backgrounds, but also European backgrounds, and also perhaps some African backgrounds. The issue is that people are unwilling, when they are identified as black, to own the fact that much of their ancestry also comes from Europe. And with this Internet Indian campaign, there are a number of individuals who just really want to focus on being Indian to the exclusion of any other ancestry. Now, of course, that could possibly be because it's not glamorous to identify ancestors who were settlers or colonizers. Let's just call them what they were. And so that's not glamorous. It's much more glamorous to identify with the indigenous part of an individual's heritage. And here you have a few other individuals. In the court of Great Britain, again, a man described as thin, brown man, 50 years old. You have another individual, Lord Lovelace, and this individual is described as a brown man, not 40 years old. You also have Ford, Lord Grey of Wark, also described as a brown, handsome man, middle stature. Now, you might want to make note of the fact that this brown, handsome man of middle stature was also identified as the governor of Barbados. So yes, in terms of having someone who was the governor of Barbados, you have an individual who's described as a quote-unquote brown man, governor of Barbados. And as you know, Barbados is the place that served as a holding space, almost like a prison colony in many instances. And so you don't have a quote-unquote white person being the governor of this place. You have a quote-unquote brown person being the governor of this place. Again, people don't find that as glamorous in terms of an ancestral narrative, and so oftentimes those narratives are left out. Okay, so here we see another individual, Robert Lord Lexington, and we see this individual is also described as brown complexion, 40 years old. You have another individual over on the right is Gentleman of the Bedchamber of the Prince of Denmark, and you see this individual is a little brown man, very lovely, 30 years old. And we have that surname Sutton, and we're going to look at that surname Sutton in terms of the black nobility. And what we have is the block is hot in the United States. Is anyone surprised? Okay, and also we have the block is hot in the Caribbean area. And the numbers are very high in the United States for that surname. You have 115,000. Again, this steep drop in England with this name coming out of Europe. This is very interesting. So it's almost like there was an exodus from Europe into the United States here. So you have 33,000 in England, you have 15,000 in Australia, 7,000 in Canada, and then a drop down to 3,000 in New Zealand and 2,000 in South Africa. One thing to remember also is that even though the individuals might be described as black or brown, it doesn't necessarily mean that their descendants are black or brown in terms of skin color, because there was a lot of intermarrying, particularly with the Moors. The Moors were really big into intermarrying and cross-fertilizing. And so you have a number of individuals who might have done what's called lightening the line. And so the individuals might not look the same today as they did back then. And so there's a lot of confusion sometimes about identity, and people think that you can base ancestry on what someone looks like, and you simply cannot do that. And here we have the surname Berties, And this individual is the Earl of Abington and is described as of a black complexion, past 40 years old. You have another individual off to the right. This individual is from the ancient and noble family of Lumley. This is Richard Lumley, Earl of Scarborough, also described as a dark person. This is an interesting surname because one of the variations of this surname is Lumbee. And there is a Native American Indian group going by the name of Lumbee, and those individuals are actually noted as having obscure origins. And so even the name coming from supposedly from the river that's in that area is just very interesting. I believe they are also in Scotland County. And so we're going to take a little look at this Lumley surname and also see if there's a distribution that includes America. Now we're first going to look at this surname Berties and Bertie, and what you see is a low distribution. You see the Bertie has a larger distribution there, but in terms of Berties, you see the distribution going into Germany at 9, you see England 2, and 1 for the United States. And we do see here some distribution in terms of the Lumbee, Lumley related surname, and you can see the block is hot in the United States, and you see 3,950 individuals with the surname Lumley, and in England you see 3,400, Canada at 1,000, South Africa at 800. And you can see the similarity here between the name Lumbee, which, you have the variation there of Lumley and a variety of spellings. You can see the similarity between that and the Lumbee Indians. And you can also look at the history of this surname Lumbee and it coming out of Europe. Another interesting notation is that this name Lumley means the enclosure by the water. And here's some information related to the early origins of the Lumbee family surname, which of course is a variant of the other one. And you can see it was first found in Lancashire, where they held a family seat as lords of the manor. Now, when you look down, you'll also see some notations related to the Lumbee tribe. And it indicates that in the first federal census of 1790, the ancestors of the Lumbee were among those numerated as free persons of color. And the Lumbee were subsequently identified as mulatto. Now, that's a common classification that many people who were American Indian descendant, that's a classification many were given. Part of the reason could be because many of those individuals, based upon the definition of mulatto, meaning mixed race, many individuals could have fallen under that classification simply because of that. And again, you have a lot of intermarrying and crossbreeding going on with individuals of European backgrounds and African backgrounds and indigenous American backgrounds. What's also interesting about the Lumbee is they have often been identified as this lost colony. And one thing you can clearly see is that you have individuals coming out of Europe who were not only quote unquote white, you have individuals who were acting as settlers and colonizers who came from diverse backgrounds. And so you also have individuals who were acting as agents in Africa who also came from diverse backgrounds. But what you also have is this dynamic of proxy going on. And so you have people substituting for the identity of others simply because of phenotype. And you also have people taking responsibility for things that they may not have had full responsibility for, but you don't have them disputing that. So you have a dynamic whereby you have ethnic cleansing of the Indians. And many individuals will simply think that that ethnic cleansing took place based upon individuals who were identified as quote unquote white. But what is also clear is you have a number of settlers, colonizers, who were also quote unquote black. And so there's enough responsibility to go around. One of the other dynamics that takes place is you have individuals who are doing things in the names of other people. And so you'll have people taking full responsibility for something that they did not do based upon phenotype. You could see that the governor of Barbados was a brown man. You can see individuals who were operating during this time with the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. They were not all quote unquote white individuals. All of the individuals interacting with the Native American Indians, they weren't always quote unquote white individuals. And again, so you see you have this mixing going on that is not as clear cut as people have previously believed. And in many instances now, even talking about individuals identifying as Aborigine online, you have individuals who really want to grab on to that indigenous identity and really reluctant to own some of that other ancestry. And in some instances, you might have another dynamic where you have racial proxy dynamics going on even with that. So you may have a number of individuals now who are, putting forth all of these ancient pictures and depictions that they found online of people who were supposed to be depictions of indigenous people, and then using that, sort of extrapolating and generalizing to mean that all brown people must have been these American Indian people or the indigenous people, when in fact you have a bunch of indigenous people from Europe and indigenous people from Africa with brown skin coming over and perhaps now acting as proxies for the original indigenous people. You also have this dynamic of proxies, and we'll talk about this as we are winding down, this dynamic of religious proxy. So you have those individuals, those Lancados who were cast out of Europe, acting as if they were the Christians. And so again, you have these racial proxies, and then you have these religious proxies that were operating simultaneously, making it very difficult to really understand who was doing what, when, why, and how. And here are some of those depictions so that you can see individuals when they are making this assertion that African Americans ain't African, or they make the assertion that 98% of African Americans are actually American Indian. They are basing it on depictions such as these. And so they extrapolate and generalize from this to make people believe that this means that every brown person in America must be descended from the individuals that you see on the screen. And here are some additional depictions. And here are some additional depictions, and you can see the individuals have a variety of phenotypes, but the phenotype aspect that is considered most important for people when they are talking about the quote-unquote copper color races is the skin color. Now, a number of individuals are highly invested, a bit over-invested in this narrative that all brown people in America are actually American Indian. And you can see here there's significant spamming. It just goes on and on and on, and flaming, and this propaganda pandering related to this belief that all brown people are the true American, as you can see on the screen. And also seeing everyone who does not agree with this as the opposition. And so they've given themselves all sorts of titles. They have a doctorate in divine reasoning and admit that they are a fake lawyer. But again, this is a bit of overload in terms of this behavior. And so it's really hard to take some of this seriously in terms of the assertions that people are making related to the ancestry of Americans. And when you look at this person's channel after them leaving the comment, you see this substantial narcissism that's going on. And that's another part of what is going on, is people want to belong to something important. They want to have an important identity. And so they will make all sorts of claims. Again, this is a conscious, quote unquote, related dynamic. And so you have individuals, talking about being a descendant of the Queen of Sheba, being a Shemitic Kemetic, being, America being the real Israel, Judah. Again, all of this is also the Cherokee. That's what you see on the left-hand side there. So again, this is all wanting to be associated with someone or something that is above and beyond, something that is considered superlative, the Queen of Sheba. Again, this is a dynamic that makes it very difficult for people to have genuine discussions about what is real and what is not real in history, even this making up of this fake name. And here you can see this individual is just conveniently indigenous. And so when it's convenient to be indigenous, the individual is indigenous. When it's convenient to talk about being from Atlantis, then the individual relates to people who are from Atlantis. When it's convenient to talk about being Nubian or being the ancient ones, the individual identifies with that. So again, this makes it very difficult for people to have open, honest, and real discussions about ancestry and the truth about American history. One thing that you must not do is appropriate the identity of others. It's important that people find out about their own identities so that they can deal with the truth of that. One of the beneficial things about looking at your own ancestry and looking at the history of your family is that you will get a better picture of the totality of your family. Many of the individuals who are identifying as Indian, they have not actually looked into their backgrounds. In many instances, they can find information that will not only tell them about one ancestor, but it will tell them about many ancestors. And so even looking at information for my own grandparent, which I'm showing you here, you can see that this individual was examined by the commission to the 5 civilized tribes. And this is for Indian benefits, to receive the benefits of being an Indian. And this is for the Choctaw. And so the examination was pretty extensive, but through this examination, what an individual will find out is not only about that particular grandparent, but you'll find out about the grandparents of the grandparent. You'll find out about the siblings. You'll find out about all of the children, because in this examination, the grandparent provides the commission with information related to the grandparent's background, the parent's background. The grandparent will tell the racial or phenotype distribution of the family members. And you will also find out if that grandparent was enslaved or descended from anyone who was enslaved. So you're going to find out quite a bit of information. You'll also find out where everyone was located so that you can trace back to the Indian tribes or the Indian nations that were in those areas. So individuals, if they are really looking, they can find a significant amount of information. But the other thing that you find out from this is you also find out not only about your quote-unquote Indian grandparents, you also find out about the extent to which you have quote-unquote brown or quote-unquote white ancestry in your background, because in this examination they tell it all. And so you do get quite a bit of information so that you will know whether or not those brown ancestors were all Indian or whether they might have been something else. Now, this is for the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, so you can also get information about the treaty that goes along with that for your particular grandparent. So if you also have this background, you can also look at that treaty. Remember, knowledge is power, and knowledge of self is most powerful. Take care and see you soon.